Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Everyone in the river-defying sect has been arrested. A huge spell formation has been set up outside Vile Emperor City. They're going to extract the blood of tens of thousands of cultivators from the Heavenspan realm. Each message from Big Fatty Zhang was like a dagger stabbing into Bai Xiaochun's heart. Patriarch Spirit Stream, Li Qinghao, and other compatriots from the river-defying sect, as well as cultivators from other parts of the Heavenspan realm, were now trapped in a spell formation outside the city. Big Fatty Zhang didn't just sound anxious in his messages, he also sounded angry. Bai Xiaochun could only imagine what level of despair he currently felt. Panting, and heart-pounding painfully, he rose to his feet, his eyes completely bloodshot as he let out a howl of anguish. Pain racked him both physically and mentally. Madness gripped him, from his mind down to his soul. He had been hurt deeply back in the incident at the Imperial Palace, and had Gongsun Wan'er not intervened, he would have lost complete control. Afterward, it was only because of the Arch-Emperor's legacy that he managed to clench his hands into fists and trudge back to the embassy like the walking dead. Then, he descended into a near-masochistic session of cultivation. His mood had lifted quite a bit after becoming the new owner of the damaged fan, but now he had returned only to be hit with this news. As of now, it was completely impossible for him to suppress the madness in his heart. He didn't care what the consequences might be, or what price he might have to pay. This was Patriarch Spirit Stream and Li Qinghao. This was the river-defying sect. This was the lives of tens of thousands of people from the Heavenspan realm. Laughing in madness, he shot out from the embassy, accompanied by intense rumbling sounds. At the same time, a murderous aura erupted from him that cast the embassy and everything around it into the dead of winter. All cultivators present shivered as they were instantly sealed in place by the aura. A moment later, a blood mist sprang out around Bai Xiaochun. He was directly resorting to the Godkiller technique. Instantly, he vanished from the embassy. By the time the embassy staff came to their senses, he was gone, and they all knew exactly where he was going. Something big is about to happen. Quick, notify Saint Emperor City. Everyone in the embassy was extremely nervous. Obviously, they knew what the Vile Prince was up to, and therefore, to see Bai Xiaochun suddenly explode into action was a clear sign that something major was going to occur in Vile Emperor City. And yet, what was about to happen surpassed anything they could possibly have imagined. The blood mist that was Bai Xiaochun shot out of the city and then headed toward the shockingly large spell formation. The spell formation was a mass of turbid chaos, making it difficult to see what was going on inside. 9 black dragons formed the main structure of the formation, and seated cross-legged in key locations were several hundred Vile Emperor Dynasty cultivators. They were powering the spell formation, and sitting cross-legged in the air above it were Reverend Devourer and Celestial Deadfall. Upon the request of the Vile Prince, they were to actually operate the spell formation. They were aware of who was sealed inside the formation, and they also knew how it all related to Bai Xiaochun. But this was Vile Emperor City, and in their estimation, the fact that Bai Xiaochun had held himself in check during the incident in the Imperial Palace indicated that he was no fool, and that he would likely do the same thing again. Celestial Deadfall was very happy to be a part of what was happening. He had not forgotten how badly he had fared against Bai Xiaochun in their fight some years ago, and was also irritated that Taoist Heavenspan's fame had surpassed his own in the Vile Emperor dynasty. If this Bai Xiaochun comes, then his end will be miserable beyond belief. He'll be forced to watch the people of Heavenspan wither and die. And his grudge won't be with me, it will be with the Vile Prince. With such thoughts on his mind, Celestial Deadfall smiled and looked down at the spell formation below. However, it was in that very moment that his expression flickered. Off to the side, Reverend Devourer opened his eyes. Both of them looked over to see a crimson blur flying in their direction from Vile Emperor City, seemingly filled with an unending aura of blood and death. As soon as they saw the blur, and sensed the fluctuations coming from within it, both Celestial Deadfall and Reverend Devourer knew exactly who was coming. Bai Xiaochun. Celestial Deadfall rose to his feet, and yet, before he could say anything, Bai Xiaochun spoke in a voice that shook heaven and earth. Are you people looking to die? His voice continued to echo through the air as he bore down on the cultivators seated cross-legged, powering the spell formation. Most of them were devas, with some being demigods, and all of them looked up in complete shock as Bai Xiaochun shot toward them. Before any of them could react, he had stabbed through 7 or 8 of them. They couldn't resist or fight back. Their bodies instantly withered, and hoarse screams erupted out as they were transformed into desiccated corpses that toppled backward onto the ground. Terror erupted in the hearts of everyone present. As for Celestial Deadfall and Reverend Devourer, they shouted in anger and leapt to block Bai Xiaochun's way. But Bai Xiaochun's godkiller technique was too fast. Rumbling sounds echoed out as dozens of enemies were slaughtered. It didn't matter how scared they were, how they tried to flee, or what techniques they tried to use to defend themselves. They were powerless against that blood mist. It all happened so quickly that even the Celestials were too slow to do anything about it, let alone the terrified cultivators powering the spell formation. Wherever the blood mist went, cultivators transformed into dried-up corpses, their flesh and blood extracted, their souls plucked out, their life force wrenched away. Hundreds of cultivators dropped to the ground, their life force flowing into the godkiller technique, making it more powerful, until the entire area was stained with crimson light. Bai Xiaochun would usually refrain from killing if he could, but once he started, he wouldn't hold back. As of this moment, his murderous aura had combined with his frustration and madness, exploding out in unprecedented fashion. "What incredible gall you have, Bai Xiaochun!" Celestial Deadfall shouted. Both he and Reverend Devourer were actually secretly delighted. Considering what had happened already, they knew that Bai Xiaochun would not easily escape catastrophe. And yet, even as Celestial Deadfall's words rang out into the air, the blood mist converged upon itself to form an image of Bai Xiaochun's face, except as red as blood. Instantly, that head began to speed toward Celestial Deadfall. Celestial Deadfall's face fell, and Reverend Devourer narrowed his eyes. Both of them began to perform incantation gestures as they prepared to join forces. Before they could, though, Bai Xiaochun's enraged voice erupted from within the blood mist. "Water Swamp Kingdom, RRRUUUUMBLE." Water vapor erupted in all directions, and spikes shot up into the air. Mountain peaks turned into a gigantic beast that rose up from the depths of the land around them, and then lunged toward Reverend Devourer. Yet again, Reverend Devourer's face fell. Originally, he would never have considered retreating, but after being set upon by this enormous beast, he had no choice. Within moments, Celestial Deadfall was left standing alone. Bai Xiaochun didn't hesitate for a moment. Accelerating, he slammed into Celestial Deadfall head-on. Howling, Celestial Deadfall defended himself, resorting to powerful divine abilities that spared him, but resulted in him tumbling backward with blood spraying out of his mouth. The godkiller technique dissipated, revealing Bai Xiaochun himself, his eyes blazing with killing intent. He wanted to take lives, even those belonging to Celestials. Without killing the people who stood in his way, he wouldn't have the time to open up the spell formation. "I've never killed a Celestial before. Is that why you dare to stand in my way?" Bai Xiaochun began to rave with maddened laughter filled with all the vicious rage that he had been keeping suppressed during his time in the eternal immortal domains. "Well, in that case, I guess I might as well kill a Celestial." Reverend Devourer had been forced into retreat by the Water Swamp Kingdom, and Celestial Deadfall had been injured to the point of coughing up blood by the godkiller. Therefore, it was without hesitation that Bai Xiaochun shot toward Celestial Deadfall. As he moved, countless rocks and boulders formed around him, transforming him into an enormous stone golem. Then, he utilized the Cloud Lightning Forefather transformation, causing his stone golem form's fleshly body power to increase dramatically, and to grow even larger than before. By the time the process was complete, he was radiating energy that caused the sky to grow dim, and sent a wild wind screaming across the lands. Celestial Deadfall could hardly breathe. Eyes wide from the sensation of deadly crisis, he immediately unleashed the full power of his cultivation base, and drew upon all of the magical items and trump cards that he could think of. And yet, none of that did anything to reduce the sensation of profound danger. In fact, as Bai Xiaochun advanced toward him, that sensation only grew more intense. Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body power erupted as he used his undying hex, as well as the mountain-shaking bash. It was almost as if he had transformed into an enormous mountain that blurred through the air toward Celestial Deadfall. Celestial Deadfall felt like he was collapsing mentally. However, he couldn't evade the blow. In his despair, he prepared to meet the strike head-on to try to survive it. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had not yet resorted to his most deadly technique. As he neared, he clenched his hand into a fist. He was using the Undying Emperor's Fist. It was no ordinary Undying Emperor's Fist. It was backed by the Living Mountain incantation, the Cloud Lighting Forefather transformation, his fleshly body power, his mountain-shaking bash, and his undying hex, as well as all of the life force he had just absorbed with the Godkiller technique. This was a fist strike of unparalleled destructive power. Everything in the area began to tremble violently as energy fluctuations were released that surpassed ordinary celestials. This energy was on the very cusp of being in the great circle of the celestial realm. time to die, Bai Xiaochun shouted. Meanwhile, celestial deadfall howled in desperation as they collided. Boom! Everything in the area shook violently, even Vile Emperor City. Mountains crumbled, and countless cultivators in the city were stunned by the deafening explosion. A shockwave spread out everywhere, along with a sound so loud that even celestial deadfall's cry of anguish was drowned out. When the dust cleared, Bai Xiaochun stood there, his right sleeve gone, revealing his arm. Although his arm seemed intact, closer inspection revealed that it was covered with too many wounds to count. However, those wounds immediately began to heal up. At the same time, it was possible to see a crater in front of Bai Xiaochun, at the bottom of which were scattered chunks of bloody flesh and gore. Celestial Deadfall's fleshly body had been completely destroyed. His Deoseed flew out, and then vanished. A Celestial had been killed. This was the second time in the eternal immortal domains that a Celestial had been killed in recent times. The first to have been killed was the old woman who had been killed by the sovereign clone, and now Celestial Deadfall. Although he could be resurrected, it was still completely momentous. Off in the distance, Reverend Devourer panted for breath, his mind spinning. Bai Xiaochun, how dare you kill a Celestial? Although the Vile Emperor dynasty and the Saint Emperor dynasty had been at odds for many years, nothing like this had ever happened before. Not only was Reverend Devourer stunned by the death of Celestial Deadfall, he was also terrified of Bai Xiaochun's display of battle prowess. He's already reached the point where he can kill a Celestial with a single fist strike. Reverend Devourer shivered with fear. Although the Water Swamp Kingdom had already faded away, he was still completely terrified. Before he could come to his senses, Bai Xiaochun turned to him, eyes bloodshot, and began to walk toward him. And then there's you. Bai Xiaochun's right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then he waved his finger in Reverend Devourer's direction. Instantly, numerous live forever lamps sprang up in the area. At the same time, Reverend Devourer himself became a lamp, along with the sky above and the land below. Reverend Devourer's face fell, not from fear of the technique, but rather because Bai Xiaochun had just pulled out the greatsword of the north, and was accelerating in his direction. Obviously, he planned to take advantage of Reverend Devourer being stuck in place by the live forever lamps, to kill him. Damn it, this guy really holds grudges. Gasping for breath, he performed an incantation gesture, causing a blood-colored light to spring up around him. In that same moment, the energy of the live forever lamps erupted, smashing into the blood-colored light and shattering it. At the same time, the great sword of the north descended toward Reverend Devourer. Normally speaking, Reverend Devourer would have chosen to go all out to seize victory. But right now, his life was more important to him than the spell formation or the people of Heavenspan. After all, everything had been set up by the Vile Prince to begin with. Therefore, it was without hesitation that he threw everything he had into blocking the sword strike. Then, blood spraying from his mouth, he sped off into the distance. Bai Xiaochun stood there panting, looking like he was completely out of control. However, the truth was that he knew exactly what he was doing. For one thing, his spectacular gains in the damaged fan had pushed him to the very brink of the late celestial realm. Second was that he was completely enraged by the situation the Vile Prince had set up. Ignoring the fleeing Reverend Devourer, Bai Xiaochun hefted the great sword of the north and then slashed it down toward the spell formation. Be destroyed, he shouted. As the sword descended, one of the 9 black dragons that made up the foundation of the formation howled as it was absolutely destroyed. The other 8 quickly rushed over to gobble up the bits of the destroyed dragon. Bai Xiaochun had never seen a spell formation like this before, but he could tell that it was extraordinary. Although he could use his undying hex to get into it, his goal was to save everyone inside. Therefore, using the undying hex would be too much of a waste of time. Being so close to Vile Emperor City, time was of the essence. He needed the spell formation open immediately. Lifting the greatsword of the north up again, he cut down toward the spell formation. Boom! He struck 7 times, destroying a black dragon with each blow. Each time, the spell formation trembled and grew weaker, until soon, the turbid chaos began to fade away to reveal the tens of thousands of Heavenspan realm cultivators inside. They were seated cross-legged in meditation, their faces ashen. Some were clearly putting up a fight, but some had already been reduced to skeletons. Bai Xiaochun quickly spotted Li Qinghao and Patriarch Spirit Stream. Uncle Li, Bai Xiaochun murmured. It had been years since they had last seen each other. Li Qinghao's hair was no longer black but gray. Next to him was Patriarch Spirit Stream, who looked haggard and withered. There were many other familiar faces, all of whom caused Bai Xiaochun to howl with rage as he slashed away with the greatsword of the north. It was at this point that, with no warning whatsoever, a beam of light shot out from Vile Emperor City toward Bai Xiaochun. Feeling suicidal, Bai Xiaochun? The voice that rang into Bai Xiaochun's ears belonged to none other than the strongest celestial in the Vile Emperor City. Celestial Virupaksha. Behind Celestial Virupaksha were streams of divine sense, which belonged to the other celestials in the city, all of whom had detected what was occurring with the spell formation. Most of them intentionally hung back a bit. After all, Bai Xiaochun had just killed Celestial Deadfall and seriously injured Reverend Devourer, leaving all of them quite shaken. Some, such as Prince Demon, were so frightened that they only dared to send out divine sense, and even then, let Celestial Virupaksha take the lead. Celestial Virupaksha, on the other hand, was the strongest celestial in Vile Emperor City, and had long since come to hate Bai Xiaochun. He had become suspicious of him back when they were both on the damaged fan, and had also suffered at his hands during the incident with the Sovereign Clone. Therefore, he did not hesitate at all to intervene when Bai Xiaochun tried to break open the spell formation. Bai Xiaochun looked up, aware that if Celestial Virupaksha hindered him in opening the spell formation, then the other celestials from Vile Emperor City would also come. Then, not only would he be in great danger, but it would also be impossible to save Patriarch Spirit Stream and the others. And that was without even mentioning the fact that the Vile Emperor could also show up eventually. Not much time had passed since he made his move, and he didn't dare to gamble on how long the Vile Emperor would remain in secluded meditation. If he emerged, then it could lead to a complete catastrophe. So, killing Deadfall didn't scare them. Well, if I can make Virupaksha stand down, then that should strike fear into their hearts. Knowing he had no other choice, he threw his head back and roared, drawing fully upon his cultivation base to shove the greatsword of the north down toward the spell formation. A boom rang out as the sword stabbed into the formation, which trembled violently but held. However, stabbing the sword into the formation not only reduced some of the danger to those inside, it also made it much more difficult for the formation to repair itself. Looking up, Bai Xiaochun unleashed shocking fleshly body and cultivation base power as he shot towards Celestial Virupaksha. Have a death wish? It wasn't that Celestial Virupaksha hadn't seen Bai Xiaochun kill Deadfall. It was that he still believed that, even if Bai Xiaochun were stronger than he was, he could still be handled. And that was especially true now that he wasn't wielding his greatsword of the north. As the two closed in on each other, Bai Xiaochun unleashed the Undying Emperor's fist at nearly the highest level it could reach. A huge boom rang out, causing wild colors to flash in heaven and earth. Blood sprayed out of Bai Xiaochun's mouth as he staggered backward. Virupaksha was equally shaken, his eyes shining brightly, and his heart swelling with shock. Even he was surprised by the fist strike Bai Xiaochun had just unleashed. Before he could attack again, Bai Xiaochun's wounds were healing up, and a ferocious smile could be seen on his face as he unleashed yet another Undying Emperor's fist. Deafening rumbling sounds could be heard as blood sprayed out of Bai Xiaochun's mouth again. And yet, he didn't hold back. In the blink of an eye, Bai Xiaochun attacked and was rebuffed 5 times in a row. And yet, Celestial Virupaksha was having a hard time sustaining the force and staggered backward, coughing up blood. Looking livelier than ever, Bai Xiaochun lunged after him. Off in the distance, Prince Demon and the other celestials gasped at the sight of what was happening. Bai Xiaochun seemed to be gripped by madness, and was doing things that none of them could ever have imagined him doing. To them, he seemed completely different from the past. As of now, he clearly pulsed with veins of steel. He was obviously injured, to the point where he was coughing up mouthfuls of blood. Even with his powers of regeneration, it didn't seem like he should be able to sustain such terrible injuries. In the face of such madness and such veins of steel, even the valiant Celestial Virupaksha was coughing up blood, and finally seemed to be hesitating. Wiping the blood off of his mouth, Bai Xiaochun said, "Bring it on." With that, he blurred into motion, unleashing more Undying Emperor's fists, causing all heaven and earth to tremble as shadowy emperors unleashed a torrent of destruction. He seemed to completely disregard any injuries to himself as he fought with increasingly shocking battle prowess. With the Undying Codex bolstering him, Bai Xiaochun seemed beyond the point of coming to a compromise. He would either kill his opponent or die trying. As his murderous aura raged, Virupaksha struggled to fight back. After coughing up 7 huge mouthfuls of blood, his face fell. "Are you really trying to get killed, Bai Xiaochun?" he shouted. There was nothing for Virupaksha to do other than shout and curse. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun's arm was in shreds, his bones visible beneath the skin. He was coughing so violently that the blood that came out was filled with chunks of internal organs. And yet, Bai Xiaochun was in such a state of madness, and his murderous aura was so intense, that Virapaksa was already hesitating about whether to keep on fighting. At this point, even winning could place him in grave danger. It's not worth it. He suddenly shot backward in the face of Bai Xiaochun's next attack. Although it was a big loss of face, the danger was too great. Just like Reverend Devourer, he chose to flee, and even regretted having gotten involved to begin with. Off in the distance, Prince Demon and the other Celestials saw what was happening, and gasped in shock. After exchanging stunned glances, they turned to head back into the city. Screw it. As long as he doesn't cause problems in the city, we should just leave him alone. This guy is obviously crazy. The Vile Emperor might be in secluded meditation, but if things keep going on like this, he'll definitely come out and take care of things. Ignoring the fleeing celestial Virapaksa, Bai Xiaochun flew back down to the Great Sword of the North. Panting for breath, he grabbed it by the hilt and then yanked it out of the spell formation. Even as his wounds healed up, he drew upon both his cultivation base and fleshly body power to slash the sword downward again. Open up, boom. He hit the very spot where he had stabbed the sword into the formation, causing cracks to spread out in all directions. Then, the spell formation exploded. As the dust settled, the tens of thousands of Heavenspan realm cultivators who had been inside looked up. Despite being weakened, they knew that they now had a new lease on life. And then they saw Bai Xiaochun. Although some didn't recognize him, many were his friends. And many began to shed tears. Arch-Ancestor. It's the Arch-Ancestor. The Arch-Ancestor came to rescue us. Bai Xiaochun couldn't keep a calm heart in the face of such exclamations. Almost immediately, he focused on Li Qinghao and Patriarch Spirit Stream, who looked profoundly weakened by this point. Rushing over to Li Qinghao, he reached out to help him to his feet. Uncle Li, considering how long it had been since they had last seen each other, it should have been a joyous reunion. And although Li Qinghao was visibly excited, his face suddenly turned grim, and he gripped Bai Xiaochun's shoulders tightly. Xiaochun, he said, sounding very anxious, you have to go save Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo. When Bai Xiaochun heard that, a tremor passed through him, and he suddenly couldn't breathe. He had been searching for news of those two very women for many years, only to hear their names now, in this moment of critical danger. They were taken away by the vile prince. Li Qinghao continued, you have to rescue them. Looking just as anxious as Li Qinghao, Patriarch Spirit Stream added, Xiaochun, they're pregnant. And considering how the two of them have been acting around each other, you have to be the father. I'm not sure why they've been pregnant for so long, but from what Junwan told me, she's definitely bearing your child. Go, save them. What? Bai Xiaochun was as struck to the core as if he had been hit by lightning. Although others might not understand the situation, based on what the giant Ghost King had told him, he knew that it was because of his bloodline and the Undying Live Forever Codex that the pregnancy terms of both women had been extended in such dramatic fashion. As of this moment, what he had felt before almost didn't count as being angry. As of this moment, he felt more fury than could be imagined. Wanner and Zemo have my own flesh and blood in them. My children. Bai Xiaochun shivered as a tempest began to build up in him, the likes of which he had never experienced in his entire life. On the one hand, he felt joy, on the other anxiety. The fact that he had no idea whether the two of them were even alive caused a fire to begin to burn hot within his heart. Xiaochun, Patriarch Spirit Stream said, it seems likely the vile prince has his eye on your physical body. Since he failed in his attempt to get it, he came up with two plans. One was to extract our blood, the other was to seize Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, and use your unborn children to harvest both their blood and vital yang energy. It's all for the purposes of extracting the secrets locked within your bloodline. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were crimson as he threw his head back and let out a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering roar. Suddenly, he was filled with a reckless rage that surpassed anything from before. These were his Taoist partners and his children. The fact that the vile prince wanted to use them for such nefarious purposes was pushing Bai Xiaochun into an insane level of rage, the type that could stain all creation with blood. Even the most fearful and cowardly person would be unable to accept such a situation, and would be driven into a violent rage. However, he had not completely lost all sense of reason. He knew that if he went to save Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, he might not come out of the situation alive. He had feared death his entire life, and usually chose to take the safe route, not the dangerous one. But right now, he didn't care. Even if he faced mountains of daggers and seas of flames, he would still go. He had to go. Even if he died, what's the big deal about dying anyway? Such sentiments had never existed within Bai Xiaochun's heart before, but right now, they dominated his mind. Despite his frenzied state, he looked over at the tens of thousands of heavenspan realm cultivators, aware that if he left them here alone, they would be in danger. And if he took them with him in the Great Sword of the North, and he ended up perishing, then they would meet the same fate. Although he might be willing to throw his life away, he couldn't force the same fate on them. He had few options. Without any hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out at the sword. It vibrated, and then released a gravitational force that grabbed all of the Heavenspan realm cultivators, even Li Qinghao and Patriarch Spirit Stream, and sucked them inside. Next, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, sending the Great Sword of the North streaking off into the distance in a beam of light. He had thought of sending them to the damaged fan. But he knew that, despite being the owner of the fan, he couldn't send that many people into it. Gongsun Wanner, I, Bai Xiaochun, beg that you do me a favor. Take my people, and this sword, and deliver them to the Grand Heaven Master. Some distance away, Gongsun Wanner materialized out of thin air, mixed emotions visible on her face. She had come much earlier, and had been considering whether to help Bai Xiaochun or not. In the end, she didn't need to. The fact that he had spoken her name aloud indicated that he knew she had come. Even as she watched in silence, he turned and became a blur of light, shooting back toward Vile Emperor City like a meteor. He trusts me that much, she thought. Turning, she blurred into motion as she went after the Great Sword of the North. She knew that Bai Xiaochun was entrusting her with the lives of tens of thousands of his people. And she also knew that she couldn't stop him from doing what he was setting out to do. It all left her feeling very shaken. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun moved with shocking speed toward the bone dragon that was Vile Emperor City. Getting rid of the Great Sword of the North reduced his battle prowess to a certain degree, but he knew that he had no other choice. It was the only way to keep the people who had called him the Arch-Ancestor safe. It was the only way to be able to fight a bloody battle to the death without any distractions. If I don't kill you this day, Vile Prince, then I don't deserve to call myself human. Die, die, die. The murderous aura which surrounded Bai Xiaochun propelled him forward like a destructive shooting star. The wind screamed and the lands quaked. The air, unable to sustain such force, cracked and shattered. The cultivators in Vile Emperor City who could see what was happening were absolutely shocked, and felt like they were being crushed by the pressure. They even felt the willpower inside of them stirring. Devas, demigods, and celestials all gasped in shock, especially those in the embassy. All of Vile Emperor City seemed cloaked with a suffocating pressure as countless eyes looked at Bai Xiaochun streaking through the air. As for his destination, it was very obvious. He was heading to Vile Prince Mansion. He looked like a vicious blade slicing through the air toward the Vile Prince. Within Vile Prince Mansion, all of the Vile Prince's subordinates were shaking in fear. Meanwhile, the Vile Prince was in a private chamber, a crazed expression on his face as he looked at the spell formation set up in front of him. Let's see how long you can last, you puny animals. The spell formation resembled a yin-yang symbol, with Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo sealed within it, their eyes closed. Both of them were trembling, their faces ashen and twisted by expressions of pain. Black smoke curled around them, stabbing into them to extract the blood and essences of both them and their unborn children. Thankfully, Song Junwan had a totemic tattoo on her forearm, which surrounded both her and Zhou Zimo with a violet, protective shield of light. Closer inspection would reveal that the totem tattoo depicted Bruiser. The spell formation was set up on a blood-colored altar, which was none other than the source of the black smoke. In response to the incantation gestures performed by the Vile Prince, the spell formation rotated constantly. At a certain point, the Vile Prince suddenly looked up and pulled out a transmission jade slip. Damn it, can't anybody stop him? You want to kill me, Bai Xiaochun? You're just asking to be cut down. Let's see who's faster, you or me. I'm so close to succeeding. Face twisting with rage, he sent a message to his father. After a long moment passed in which he got no response, he got flustered, and started sending messages to the Celestials in the city. He made all sorts of promises of incredible compensation in order to get their help, and when he finally got a response, he breathed a sigh of relief. Still worried though, he ordered the demigods under his command to intercept Bai Xiaochun. The experts in Vile Prince Mansion had no choice but to brace themselves and fly out into the open. By this point, Bai Xiaochun had reached the heart of Vile Emperor City, and was closing in rapidly. Before the Vile Prince's minions could reach him though, the Celestials who had responded to his promised rewards arrived. Taoist Heavenspan, Prince Demon, Reverend Devourer, and Celestial Virapaksa all appeared. The first thing they did was try to convince Bai Xiaochun to stop. Back down, Bai Xiaochun. The Vile Emperor is coming out of seclusion at any moment, Bai Xiaochun. Wake up. We can work things out, there's no reason for all of this. On any other occasion, Bai Xiaochun might have agreed to a compromise. But right now, his eyes were bloodshot, and his murderous aura raged to unheard of levels. Never before in his life had he been this dead set on killing people. All of you, get the hell out of my way. He didn't waste time with words. He immediately resorted to the mountain-shaking bash, adding in raw fleshly body power and energy from his cultivation base. He even used the undying hex and his godkiller technique. A boom could be heard as he slammed into Prince Demon and Taoist Heavenspan. Blood sprayed out of both of their mouths as they were sent tumbling to the side. As for Reverend Devourer and Celestial Virapaksa, although they were still leery about the situation, they still tried to block Bai Xiaochun's path. More booms rang out as Bai Xiaochun himself coughed up blood, his chest completely caved in. However, he didn't seem to care. Laughing with madness, he grabbed Celestial Virapaksa and violently headbutted him. As Celestial Virapaksa coughed up blood, he realized that Bai Xiaochun was opening his mouth as if to bite a chunk out of his face. Without any hesitation, Virapaksa paid a heavy price to flee using a secret magic. He's really gone insane. Meanwhile, as Bai Xiaochun was tangled up with the Celestials, the Vile Prince's minions were flying out to meet a different intruder. He wore black robes that matched his swirling black hair, and wielded a long spear. Although he was clearly a diva, he was obviously powerful enough to fight with demigods. He was none other than Song Ke. After glancing up at the battle being fought between the Celestials, he turned toward Vile Prince Mansion. Care is here to rescue you, Aunt Junwan. Up in midair, Bai Xiaochun shoved Celestial Virapaksa out of the way with the blood mist of his godkiller technique, then ignored Prince Demon and the other Celestials as he headed directly toward Vile Prince Mansion. He was completely out of patience, and therefore, anyone who got in his way would either be shoved to the side or killed. No one could stop him. Reverend Devourer secretly frowned. He was a slick and evasive person, and in any other circumstances would have simply stood down and let things play out how they would. Unfortunately, they were right in the middle of Vile Emperor City. If Bai Xiaochun got to Vile Prince Mansion and did something drastic, then the Vile Emperor would likely be furious. Celestial Virapaksa might have it a bit easier because of the fact that he hadn't been working with the Vile Prince earlier on. But Reverend Devourer had been working closely with the Vile Prince for a while now, and therefore, he had no choice but to try to do something. Thinking back to how things had played out in the incident with the Sovereign's clone, he quickly chose what he hoped would be an effective tactic. Prince Demon, Taoist Heavenspan. We can't let Bai Xiaochun get into Vile Prince Mansion. The Vile Emperor will be out of secluded meditation at any moment. Even as the words left his mouth, he blurred into motion, drawing on significant cultivation base power to teleport right into Bai Xiaochun's path. Prince Demon and Taoist Heavenspan both had serious expressions on their faces as they utilized trump cards to help. Bai Xiaochun battered against their resistance several times in a row, but could not get past them. By this point, his murderous aura and burning rage had reached epic heights. Are you people looking to die? The blood mist of the godkiller technique shrank down, revealing Bai Xiaochun himself. Without any hesitation, he lunged to slam into Taoist Heavenspan. Rumbling sounds echoed out as Taoist Heavenspan tried to leap out of the way, but was hit in the shoulder. Instantly, most of his shoulder and arm were shattered, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. Before he could react, Bai Xiaochun unleashed both the Live Forever lamp and his Water Swamp Kingdom to prevent Reverend Devourer and Prince Demon from intervening. Then, killing intent flickered in his eyes as he drew on the mountain-shaking bash and his undying Emperor's fist. Before the attack hit, Taoist Heavenspan's eyes suddenly turned black, and black smoke poured out from inside of him to form a defensive barrier. It was a powerful obstacle. The fist strike that Bai Xiaochun had used to seriously injure Celestial Deadfall did little more than knock Taoist Heavenspan back by a few hundred meters, completely uninjured. Furthermore, the backlash Bai Xiaochun suffered caused him to grunt in pain. At the same time, tendrils of black smoke began to wrap around him like fetters, causing blood to ooze out of his mouth as he staggered backward, his powers of regeneration working at top speed. Meanwhile, Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer both looked on with glittering eyes. The perfect opportunity, Reverend Devourer said, performing an incantation gesture that caused a bright blue sea to materialize around him. The sea quickly transformed into a gaping maw that lunged toward Bai Xiaochun. As for Prince Demon, he also took action, causing a glowing red light to surround him. At the same time, a huge demon appeared at his back, crimson, with two horns sticking out of its head. Snarling, it jumped toward Bai Xiaochun. In the face of this seeming crisis, Bai Xiaochun simply chuckled. Eyes shining with madness and determination, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a 22-colored flame. Prince Demon's face fell, and Reverend Devourer gasped loudly. Neither of them knew exactly what Bai Xiaochun was holding, but the terrifying power they could sense from it left them completely and utterly shaken. Furthermore, this was not an ordinary 22-colored flame. It had been conjured with the help of a sovereign's Tao essence of life and death, and contained some of that very essence. Not good, that aura, we can't let it hit us. They immediately fell back, and yet, they were too slow. Even as they began to move, Bai Xiaochun crushed the multicolored flame, causing a massive explosion. In that instant, a rumbling sound shook all of Vile Emperor City, and a powerful shockwave spread out in all directions. Even the bone dragon trembled, and numerous buildings on its surface collapsed. And that wasn't even the most terrifying thing that happened. As the 22-colored flame spread out, it devoured anything it touched. Moments before, a host of cultivators from Vile Prince Mansion had been in the process of surrounding Bai Xiaochun, and were looking on gleefully as his progress was hindered. But then, before they could react, they saw a fire the likes of which they had never seen before in their entire lives. And it was also the last thing they saw. Flames covered them, filling them with indescribable pain before reducing them to nothing but ash. The nearby buildings had already been emptied. After all, a battle between celestials was something that weaker cultivators would only dare to observe from afar. However, the buildings that remained were also turned into ash by the burning fire. Prince Demon and Reverend Devourer were the closest to the epicenter, and were forced to draw upon the full power of their cultivation bases to protect themselves. Even still, they suffered significant injuries, and ended up coughing up blood, their eyes filled with shock. As they burst out of the expanding flames, Reverend Devourer moved a bit quicker, with Prince Demon falling a bit behind. If they had been given a straight shot to escape, they would have been able to. However, it was in that moment that a stone golem suddenly stepped out of the fire. The stone golem was apparently not hurt at all by the fire, and in fact, didn't even pay any attention to it. Howling, it reached out and grabbed the despairing Prince Demon. No, he shrieked, struggling. Unfortunately, he had reacted too slowly, and was soon engulfed by the expanding flames, along with the stone golem. Although no one could see what happened afterward, they could hear the agonized shrieking coming from within the fire. Taoist Heavenspan gasped and backed up, and Reverend Devourer shivered in fear as he accelerated away in the opposite direction. Celestial Virupaxa was further off in the distance, but even he pushed forward with greater speed. The fire lasted for about 10 breaths of time, after which the stone golem appeared, striding forward. Rock and stone began to crumble off of it until Bai Xiaochun was revealed, injured, but already recovering thanks to his undying codex. It took only moments for all of his flesh and blood to be back to normal. As he walked along, he dragged the unconscious Prince Demon along with him. Instead of killing him, he tossed him into his bag of holding, then looked around for a moment before once again heading toward Vile Prince Mansion. All of the celestials and demigods in the area, as well as the other cultivators in Vile Emperor City, were completely stunned by what they had just witnessed. Even Celestial Virupaxa was shaken. Earlier, he hadn't been willing to put everything on the line, and was now even less willing. After seeing the eruption of multicolored flame, he felt fear deep in his heart. It's not worth it to provoke him, not even for the sake of the Vile Prince. Besides, I was just asked to buy some time. I'd say I've accomplished that task already. No one was blocking Bai Xiaochun's path, and the Vile Emperor had not yet emerged from seclusion. Bai Xiaochun had no time to think about why that might be. Ignoring the exhaustion which was beginning to creep up inside of him, he stepped into Vile Prince Mansion. The instant he did, he saw piles of corpses. The corpses, whether they were devas or nascent soul cultivators, were all killed in the same way, a spear wound to the forehead. Bai Xiaochun quickly sent some divine sense out, until he saw what was happening in the Grand Hall. There, he saw a familiar face, someone wearing a black robe and wielding a long spear. He was so soaked in blood that it dripped off of him and formed a pool around him on the ground. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.